Puppet Combo's vast array of games are packed to the brim with terrifying storylines and gripping characters. The developer's work is so unbelievably bone-chilling, it's almost impossible for a lot of Let's Players to even get through their games after 2 or 3 jump scares. In this slasher-based creator's work, there are protagonists that are strong and not so strong in the variety of menacing threats you're put in front of, so let's get ready to pounce headfirst into Puppet Combo's lineup of antagonists, ranked from strongest to weakest. And just to preface, we will be including games published by Torture Star, but won't be including Puppet Combo's unfinished games, because the final products could change after the making of this. We'll also exclusively be ranking the main antagonists from each game, because they have to go through the main tribulations of these stories, so playable characters like cops won't be counted. So get ready to dive headfirst into Puppet Combo protagonists, rated from weakest to strongest. Now just to let you know, we're basing this list off of our own speculation and opinions, going off of the feats these characters have performed in their respective games. First up on the list is Alice from Sam Hain. The plot of her game revolves around her guiding her 2 brothers when they're trick-or-treating on Halloween, and this is literally her only job. Now, although the entire universe in which this game takes place is pretty nefarious because the residents of these houses are giving out body parts, Brother 2 suddenly goes missing after visiting 2 houses and walking up a slope. They theorize that Brother 2 got scared and just went home, and yes, they're just called Brother 1 and Brother 2. After talking to a sketchy scarecrow who tried to convince Alice to go to the forest, Alice comes closer to the final house, which is right by a cemetery, and Brother 1 disappears. Once she realizes it's a dead end, she decides to go through the forest, stumbles upon a pagan ritual site, and then throws her candy into the pyre, which is a structure made for burning a body as a part of a funeral rite or execution. This causes the 4 horsemen to come about, who usher in the apocalypse, and if you're not familiar with the Book of Revelations, they bring about the apocalypse. We have no idea what happened to Alice's younger brothers. All this girl had to do was watch her brothers, and she brought about the apocalypse. You can make the argument she's actually pretty powerful, since she literally brought about the end of the world with her Halloween candy, but the way this ritual was set up, besides the body parts as the final component, was the pagans' doing. The ability to destroy everything wasn't intrinsic to Alice, because anyone who had the body parts could have done this if they had gotten there first. The fact that she couldn't watch where her brothers were going is put into perspective by other people on this list, battling serial killers, outrunning supernatural entities, and warding off zombie apocalypses. This girl failed at using her eyes, and that gets her this spot on this list. Second place for person who'd be the lamest proposal for an Avenger is the nameless protagonist from These Trees Are Spectral Fingers. The reason we've put this person here is because they have pretty much no special abilities whatsoever, and the game consists pretty much exclusively of walking, reading, opening doors, reading, walking, reading, and walking. Because the actions of this character are rendered utterly pathetic by the actions of others on this list, that's why such an undesirable spot goes to this protagonist. Succeeding that is Billy from Feed Me Billy. This character is again plagued by the same problems with the previous 2 characters, in that they don't have any special abilities, nor have they performed any noteworthy feats in our opinions. Literally all this guy did was interact with parcels from the CFE, shoot people, and feed their bodies to the pit. Maybe if we got to see Billy install the pit into his closet, if it ever actually existed, we'd see him do something remarkable, an action that most other people can't do. Up next, and rounding off the list of the week, we have Deborah, but specifically in Night Shift. Now, this is through no fault of her own, because she's earned this particular spot because she just hasn't done much at all. She does get kidnapped by the butcher, but other than that, there's again no noteworthy action that she contributes. She clocks in and out, she sweeps the floor, she has the opportunity to play the Power Drill Massacre arcade, but other than that, we just don't have much to go off of with this character. Alright, up next are the people of moderate strength. The characters who you wouldn't count on to be so badass as to run into a shitstorm guns blazing, but who you wouldn't vote off in the first Among Us meeting. The first protagonist in this category is the camera person from the Riverside incident. We're definitely experiencing deja vu here, because this game consists of walking and walking and walking and walking. This game actually isn't similar to These Trees Are Spectral Fingers due to the fact that most of it happens inside of a house, and it definitely gives off more investigative documentary vibes. In a similar fashion, the next entry in this section of the list is Eliza Munoz from the Enigma of Salazar house. It seems that journalists get the short end of the stick in Puppet Combo games, and that's definitely for an understandable reason, as this game, much like the ones mentioned previously, is just a search for items with an eerie feeling to it. At least in the other games on this list, player is actually trying to finesse powerful killers more than twice their in-game size. None of the endings really make Eliza into a hero, so that's why she fits snug into the spot. Up next, we have Connor. Now, this might resonate as a controversial pick for being put here on this list, but fundamentally all Connor had to do was again hunt for items to vanquish the cheek dictator. Doing away with the booty creek cheek freak is an impressive feat, but vanquishing the smell of your ass isn't, even if you're confronting someone with supernatural smelling abilities. Also, Connor could have just defecated somewhere in the woods instead of the forbidden stall, and specifically not where the turd was supposed to go, which really calls into question his mental competency. Just defer to the advice of others, Connor. Next up is the protagonist from Evil in the House of Dr. Flechenstein. We put this protagonist this low on the list because this person wasn't fighting that powerful of an enemy for the most part. The zombies in this game are nowhere near as powerful as Left 4 Dead zombies because they're really slow, have sluggish reaction times, and when they get next to you, it does take a couple hits for them to kill you. The more powerful villains were really lame, and when this character had an abundance of ammo and was operating with a revolver most of the time, we think one would be sympathetic if we put this character in this position. Getting into the stronger portion of those who generally fall into the middle in terms of strength on this list, we have Beth from Planet of Bloodthirsty Santa. We put her in this spot due to the fact that she runs away from threats most of the time, instead of doing anything particularly badass. Purely avoiding threats most certainly isn't weak, but there's an array of preceding characters who've done tremendous amounts more than this. Up next, and rounding off those put in the moderate strength category, is Jim, because most of the night watch consists of checking for fires and monitoring the weather using the computer. After refueling the generator, he does do the noble task of checking on campers who are in distress, and in doing so, came across camping equipment and finds what's quite possibly a CFE ritual location. Next is Janet from Meat Cleaver Mutilator. Not much to speak of here due to the fact that most of what she does is run and run and run. From what we're convinced is Puppet Combo's first animatronic slasher. She does gun him down at the very end, but to top some of the preceding characters, she's got a lot to prove. To end this list, we have Terrence from Day 7. The reason he's ending the section of characters embodying moderate strength, not in the strong section, is because although he did manage to survive quite a long time in level 0 of the backrooms with Sally's help, and managed to kill the cannibal frantically running around and killing people, Terrence then went on to become his own Puppet Combo slasher. He's here because his actions aren't something just anyone can do, but he did receive help. Alright, moving on to the strong characters on this list. To kick off this section, we have the protagonist from Spiders. But why would such badassery be so low on the list? Well, an abundant supply of guns, barricades, blades, and flamethrowers definitely don't leave this guy in a state of complete invulnerability. Stronger characters on this list only acquire weapons in times of deep desperation with a very finite amount of ammo, and their guns just ward their respective threats off instead of kill them. When you're someone who has Doomguy levels of carrying capacity, that kind of skews the battle in your favor. The other protagonists are fighting uphill battles, so that's why we put him in this specific spot. Next up is Nicholas Burr. Why so low on this section of the list? Well, to start off, we put him in the strong section because not only did he slaughter virtually all of the staff of the sanitarium he was assigned to, escape, and go around indiscriminately breaking into people's houses and just murdering them. We're mentioning him this early because he's 6'4", so he'd be able to overpower pretty much anyone he encounters, and he did almost die because of a babysitter who had more stamina than him, so if you ask us, he deserves this spot. Up next, and not too dissimilarly, Larry from Christmas Massacre is up for a spot in the strong category. When he was a kid, Larry managed to severely wound a nun, and subsequently slaughtered everyone. 20 years later, he also drove to a household to murder all of the people in it, and a grocery store, and a bunch of partygoers, and a movie theater, and the old Catholic school. Oh yeah, and also the rest of Blood Maniac. That's another factor in this ranking. It's lucid that Larry has what's probably the strongest will to live out of all of these protagonists, but again, he's tainted by the same problem Burr had, that he's just such a physically powerful man to the point where he could likely overpower anyone, unless there's a literal brigade after him. After that, there's the nameless protagonist from Minotaur. Most of what she says does consist of kinda jogging away from the driller killer and then collecting the keys. We put her here because Minotaur's map didn't feature as many challenging hazards to the player as PDM did, and on top of that, the game is really short, so it's insanely hard to find the keys in this game. In addition to the woman from Minotaur, Jean from Evil Clowns was also put in this arena of this third of the video because she was put into a situation that wasn't as vigorously challenging as it could be. We wouldn't be surprised if one could completely get through the game by sheer finesse alone, because the clowns seem like they're completely blind. The only thing that's remotely a challenge in this game is the final boss, and even beating him merely takes some weaving and stocking up on shotgun ammo. But even then, using the cleaver alone would probably do you justice. So Jean was placed into such an advantageous situation that earns her this spot. Up next are the protagonists from Ski Freak, specifically the action hero. Faced with skiing away from what appears to be a Yeti, these characters, one who seems to be invalid by the way, manage to evade the monster while skiing at fiber optic internet connection speeds, one of whom was exclusively on a snowboard, mind you, and this is all while dodging virtually every obstruction within a 10-mile radius that seems to have been all conveniently placed down to hinder their paths, which is especially noticeable since half the stuff placed there barely makes any sense. We guess the monster has to eat somehow, but the strongest character by far is clearly the hunter, because not only did he avoid obstacles and kill the monster, but he still continues to do similar things. Bravo for persistence. And along with the Ski Freak protagonists, she should also join the Olympics, because like how they can ski, she can run, and run. Now, of course, the driller killer is clearly adept at jumping people, but the reason we're putting Megan at such an intermediate part of this section is because literally all she does is sprint, read shit, collect keys, and maybe get trapped, and be scared if you get the bad ending. Be your most badass self. Also, in a department which involves running most of the time, we have Rachel. Now, although she kept on evading this quack over the course of what seems like a season in terms of time and a square light year in terms of space and distance, Rachel, like Megan, proceeds to run and run and run and run. There was a sequence in which she did balance along what seemed to be the most questionably placed wooden planks in all of America, and she had to rummage about vacant buildings for coins, all while finessing the Ripper. However, if the player maintains their distance from the Ripper, the game will most likely play out in their favor. Also, if they get the gun, that's an almost game-breaking advantage in their favor. Alright, onto the much more powerful protagonists on the list. The first up is Claire from Search Party. She was tasked with fighting a wide array of monsters that could appear at quite literally any moment on top of figuring out a series of convoluted puzzles that almost seem like they're meant to entrap you and perplex you. This kind of decisiveness and badassery doesn't come around often. Venturing into the territories of what we consider the true heroes of this list, we have Carol. Upon being kidnapped and placed in a strange house, she had enough ingenuity and quick thinking to get Susan and herself out of the killer's house and into his van, which lets them drive away, or if the player calls 911 at the motel, she's well prepared enough so that the officer could be notified and face off with the killer to rescue Carol. Or if she doesn't find the van keys, the officer will nonetheless show up and still shoot the killer dead. Either way, Carol plays the game to her own benefit, and that's why she deserves this spot. Next up is Sarah from Bloodwash. Doubling as both a detective and someone trying to not get killed by a homicidal lunatic isn't an easy feat, and Sarah had the grit to break into the Womb Ripper's hiding place and discover the bodies of her victims, eventually going on to get a gun and then shoot her in the head. Quite the challenge. Up next is fan favorite, and bearing a name that's not too dissimilar from the previous entry, is Sarah from Babysitter Bloodbath. Christ, what absolute agony this woman went through, babysitting Billy. Oh, and taking on a knife-wielding murderer who would have stopped at nothing to break into Billy's parents' house and kill not only Jack, but Sarah and Billy. Yeah, that's quite the impressive task. She not only navigated past this guy who seemed like he could be in more than one place at a certain time, knowing how quickly he reappears and disappears between attempts to attack player. Not only that, but she got the gas to fuel up the car, and in a final showdown, she either guns this guy down or straight up beats him to death, and successfully saves Billy, for what it's worth, I guess. That's why she's our pick for this spot. Next up isn't anyone in particular, but a group of people who were placed into the same scenario, and that's the schoolgirls from Buzzsaw Bloodhouse. However, the spawning physics in their world works. They had overcome what Jigsaw could only dream of coming up with, alongside a maniac in a jumpsuit. The reason we put them high on the list, but not at the very top, is because what they had to do is pretty simple. Just finesse the traps that are trying to kill them and avoid the chainsaw swings of the maniac, which are pretty slow. The traps are hard though, and because we felt ambivalent about them, we put them here. Next up is the nameless protagonist from Tonight It Follows. All she's armed with is a pipe, and she's forced to face numerous supernatural entities that could kill her in one hit. For the sake of what's presumably balancing, she can also kill them with one hit, which makes us wonder what her weapon is made out of, but it takes immense strength to go toe-to-toe with whatever these entities were, knowing what they've done to characters in the game. Up next is Mrs. McDonald. This is the only protagonist to go up against a highly aggressive supernatural entity besides the characters from Night Shift, knowing that the nun can not only phase through vents, but is also what, 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and is totally hell-bent on stabbing her to death, really makes it to where we can't deny her a spot like this. Not only that, but for each ending, she has to solve a litany of puzzles that involve scales, numbers, and detective work to stumble upon one of them. Next up is Emma, and before we get into the fact that she managed to best a highly experienced killer, she manages manages to uncover various clues which take some detective work and eventually result in her finding the Easter Ripper's eggs, which subsequently leads her into a greenhouse where she finds the Easter Ripper. Absolutely not someone we'd want to mess with. Next up is Margaret. The sick and twisted deeds of Dr. Edward Sullivan are quite the monstrosity to go up against, and it takes a certain type of badassery to get someone a spot like this. After she enters the main experimentation room, she takes the monster out with a few rifle shots and then escapes just as the Mad Doctor's lab explodes into a fiery inferno. She then fights off hostile dead bodies and then fights the monster again, eventually blowing its head off. For this all could have been some sort of hallucination, delusion, a fantasy, or a fever dream, but nevertheless, what she did earns her this spot. And for the very top spot on the list of the least to most powerful puppet combo protagonists is Roxanne from Stay Out of the House. Most of the gameplay in this title consists of solving really intricate and complicated puzzles that most people would probably need a walkthrough for if they don't want to spend tons and tons of hours at the game, alongside avoiding getting killed by the butcher, as well as trying to avoid or kill off his mother. If the player gets ending A, Roxanne manages to solve enough puzzles to work her way to a bunker and finds a door with a red hue around it. She's then knocked out and can only watch protuberance extends out of the creature's maw and seemingly examines her with its own mouth. As she fearfully begs for her own life, the limb abruptly descends upon Roxanne, presumably devouring her. In the escape ending, Roxanne is able to unlock the front door and escapes outside. Upon exiting the cornfield, the butcher suddenly appears from the side, revving up a chainsaw. She runs into the nearby scrubland, eventually finding a trailer park. Her pursuer having disappeared from sight, Roxanne bangs on a random door, being greeted by a strangely untroubled man who ignores her panicked state and asks her if she would like to come inside. Roxanne then suddenly experiences abdominal pains and again begs the stranger to help her before she begins to spit out blood. Then a worm-like creature is seen wriggling its way out of her mouth. In any of these endings we've mentioned, and also in the ones we haven't mentioned, we feel these feats truly took the most might out of any main character, and that's why she's our pick for the most powerful puppet combo protagonist. Well, those are what we believe to be the most powerful puppet combo protagonists. Let us know what you think.